And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 71. Tonight we're going to be looking at the notion of hands in photography. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the notion of hands doing something, hands at work. So let's just show you some of you may have seen this picture that I had for the event page. So I'll talk a little bit more about this photo, but also that notion of specifically addressing hands at work as such. I'm also going to talk a little bit, it feels a little bit strange for me because on Tuesday I was, today's Tuesday, on Sunday, just 2 days ago, I did episode 70 and a half. So having already done a podcast in between the podcasts, I kind of keep losing sense of what day it's on. But I do want to talk a little bit about the YouTube trial that I did on Sunday, and I'm also looking for a little bit of feedback on that if anybody's ready to sort of dive into the comments. But I'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, the other thing I'll be talking about after this is the notion, or is the critique section. We've had a few people send in for critique. Graham's put in this picture. Just wondering a little bit about the notion of lighting and post-processing and a couple of ideas that he's looking for feedback on that. Benedito was playing around with a picture of a road, which he then converted into black and white, looking for a little bit of feedback on that. Jim was playing around with a cross, a different cross this time from the same building, but from a different angle and background. From the one that we were looking at the podcast on Sunday. Fiji she was out with her phone, didn't have her camera with her, caught a couple of beautiful shots of sort of reflections in the golden hour, but is wondering about notions of cropping and how it, what's the kind of best way to display a picture like this. And Vandana has been trying out things with her camera as well, seeing if she can improve what she's doing, and so is looking for a little bit of feedback there. And finally, I'll be talking about Inga sent in this picture of a windsurfer, but the problem here was the choice with, do I kind of brighten it up enough to see the windsurfer, in which case we lose the beautiful colours in the sky, or do I concentrate on the colours of the sky, in which case everything in the foreground becomes a bit dull. So we're going to be talking about that as well. So that's us here at the moment, live on Facebook. If you're watching, please leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know where you're from. And we'll get underway. So I can already see there's a few comments in. Jackie says hello from South Africa. Brian is saying hi all from a dull but dry Dumfries. Jim is also saying hi everyone, but from a bright and sunny Dumfries. That's interesting. Obviously, Brian and Jim are in different parts. The weather's different depending on which side of Dumfries you happen to be in on. Stacey saying good afternoon from Pennsylvania. Roy is saying hello from West Yorkshire. Inga is saying good evening from Oslo. Stacey says she's trying to remove a background photograph in Photoshop, and you've forgotten how. Okay, well, stick your image in for next week's podcast then, Stacey, and we can certainly have a go and see what it is you're trying to do. And Robert's here saying howdy all from Texas. Cool. Right, so we have a few people in. Excellent. That's just what I wanted. So what to talk about first? Shall I mention? Okay, no, what I'm going to do first, let's talk about hands. And then after the hands, I want to talk a little bit about the podcast that I did on Sunday. Now, the notion of talking about hands is because I'm setting the challenge for next week. The next week's live challenge for this podcast will be, I want you to photograph hands at work, hands doing something. And so with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just a handful of photos. Sandra's here. It says hi everyone. Vandana is also saying hi all. Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a few photos I've taken of hands at work as such, and just kind of give you some ideas, some inspirations, and we'll talk through some of the thoughts. If you have any thoughts while I'm talking, drop them into the comments. I will keep checking in on the comments periodically, and I can answer any questions that you've got. Because we're setting this up for next week's challenge, it's a good idea to start having a sense of what you would like to do and how you might go about doing it. So let's start off. A quick photo then of, this was taken of a chef. It's slicing through some scallops. So what we're aiming for here is to get that sense of action. There's a diagonal sense. We're not looking straight on. We've got a sort of slight diagonal with the board. We've got a slight diagonal with the knife. The knife is sort of reflecting part of the scallop. The hands are coming down. The focus is, on the front of the hand and where the knife is, and so that part's in focus, and it sort of disappears out fairly shortly afterwards. So you can do that kind of stuff. With this, we've got a couple of different lights. The main light is coming from slightly behind, and then there's a light coming from as we're looking at it, sort of slightly from the left as well, which is kind of filling in. But actually having that light behind sort of creates this sort of little bit of edge light coming on the back of his hand, which also helps separate him out from the background a little bit more. Other photos. Here's one where this one is Amanda Simmons, who's a glass artist, and in this case she has a sheet of glass, and she's using a tea strainer to put powdered coloured powders onto the glass, which once they melt, you then get these incredible, they get heated up rather, and they melt into the glass, and you get these incredible colours and patterns from it. And I did some photography for her back in January this year. And so Amanda, one of the things was, Amanda said she was quite interested in kind of seeing if we could capture the powder as it sort of dropped out of the tea strainer. And interestingly, it had only been a couple of weeks, for those of you who may remember, just before Christmas, and I did a set of photos of mince pies, and within that we had, using virtually an identical process, I would use a tea strainer with icing sugar in it, and been tapping that to create a cloud of icing sugar coming down. And the big thing about it was to have to really capture all that detail there. You needed to have a light that's sitting behind, not necessarily directly behind, but behind and to one side of the powder, and then you need a dark background so that it shows up. Now this light then, as well as lighting up the powder, is also lighting up her hands. We've got, as well as she's holding the tea strainer straight on towards us, and then she's using the hand on the left here to tap it so that the powder comes out. So that's another kind of, and this becomes part of a kind of ongoing theme in a way, sort of where you're going to place the light. This one, we get very similar to the chef with the knife. If you notice, there's a light off to the right and behind, catching the back here, and then we've got a light coming in from the left and lighting up her hand. In this case, this is Claire varnishing a piece of wood, and we're wanting to get that wonderful sort of sense of depth. So it's focus. The focal point here, you can see her fingers are in focus, the brush itself is in focus, and some of that incredible pattern on the wood there as well. But what we've also got though is we've got another hand in the background where she's leaning against the board as she's pressing against it. This classic one, if you have access to a potter, potter's hands are always fun. Covered in clay, trying to get a sense of movement with the pot, while at the same time trying to get a sense of action with the hands. So with this, you can, the movement of the pot is, I mean, it's not a fast, particularly, well, it's not that slow a shutter speed, but because the wheel's going fairly fast, fast in his hands are nice and sharp. The clay is just starting to blur there as it's sort of spinning on the wheel. This one is another one. I suppose this is less about the hand and more about the pot truth really, but we can see the thumb coming down. The real sharp point on this is the thumb print just in front of the thumb. Now this is much more, I suppose, a texture shot, but I do like the way that you know the hand is there. So this is yet another way of thinking about hands as well, is you know, when they are, what impression are they making? If you've got hands on some kind of malleable soft surface, then is it making an imprint with it as well? You know, so I mean, as we've so far we've had, you know, cutting, we've had using tools, tapping things, painting, but using the potter wheel. But with this case now, you know, actual imprint on the substance. We can take this a little bit further, and here this is Tom from Earth's Crust Bakery. I think he was making croissants actually. He's got butter folded in underneath that flour there. And here, you know, you've got the dough, you know, bits of it all around the fingers. You can see the apron covered in flour in the background, the hands in action as such. Again, we've got light kind of coming slightly from behind as well as mainly from the front. Other ones here, this one is, you know, this was taken the same, well, we've got that one, which I've already shown you. This one was the Livingston's Tailors, where he's threading the needle. You zoom in here, you can see the thread going through. But that seemed an important point. What we're trying to get is that detail. With this one here, he's making lines onto creating a template, which is then going to be laid over the cloth, which he's then going to cut out. So again, you can use, in this case, we've got a very smooth surface. The hands are then coming in at a diagonal. Once again, I'm using a light behind as well as the main light coming this way, which is sort of separating out from the background. The line comes straight down, so the focal point is the front finger and the pencil. This is where it's all coming to, and you get that feeling of the pencil being drawn back. So hands in action, but there's diagonals coming into it, which if you remember that notion that diagonals add a sense of energy and movement to a picture, whereas horizontals and verticals tend to kind of create more of a stability and a stillness. This one we've already talked about. This one here, another close-up hand one, where he's literally just putting needles into something just like to hold small tack threads, just to kind of hold things in place, folding over the edge of the cloth, ready to just sort of stitch a bit in. So we've got strong diagonal coming down from the top left, but we've also got the pin coming in, or the needle rather, coming in from that angle as well. So you're creating these diagonals, that which is, you know, also coming as a strong diagonal running down from the top left as well. So there's a real set, it gives that sort of sense of action and movement. Now, with nearly all these, you're noticing this notion of a kind of a double light system, and you know, it is quite a good way of bringing out the texture of creating separation. So if you've got a light source on one side, now you can just use a single light source, but sometimes if you've got a second one bouncing back, it sort of helps kind of play around with the three-dimensionality of it. This is actually Maggie's hand. This is my wife's hand. A few years ago, she was doing a lot of encaustic work, which is playing around with wax and building up. So you're creating layers and layers and layers, bit by bit, putting paint and rust fragments and found objects, all sorts of things. Maggie would sort of layer into the wax, but then she would also gouge into it, slice into it, carve into it, put other powders in, and then put more on. And this was a photo where she's got a scalpel and she's carving into the cold wax. And again, there's that notion of a hand just really at it. You can see the tension in the fingers. This one is Narelle. Narelle is a luthier, so she repairs and makes pretty much anything that comes under the category of stringed instruments. So violins quite a lot, but she's made cellos. She, if it's got wood and it's got strings, she can either fix it or make it. I did a set of photos for her. This is her. You can see this is the back of a violin, and she's sort of busy carving into that. In this case, we've just got the one light, which was, I think we even had this light, might have been outside. I think it was outside the window, and we had blinds across the window because we were creating a particular look. But you can see the light coming in from one side. So this was kind of basically to make it look like a kind of daylight coming through the window. And so consequently, you've got much harder shadows going on here. This lovely kind of chisel edge here, creating beautiful reflections as well. This one was done more recently for Sarah Stewart. Who's a printmaker. She's various kind of, and anyway, she's got this fantastic old printer where you shove the stuff in and you push it. You've got you've inked up your template or whatever. You placed it on the paper. Put a bit of card between the two, and then it goes through the press, that's the word I'm thinking of, the printing press, and you wind it through, and you've just got all these wonderful old cogs and gears and what have you, but we've got the hand gripping it ready just as to turn the wheel. Now this one is very much all about verticals and horizontals, and it has a sense of, it's less so much of a thing in action and more a sense of presence and strength, I think, with this, and stability. Now, the same day I did the shoot for Sarah with this, we also did some smaller ones where she had a roller going onto a lino cut print, and we did this photo. Now this photo very much a kind of looks like a studio setup, and basically it's on a white table up against a white wall, and I've got two lights. I've got the main one coming down from the top left. I do have another one behind her, but that's mostly pointing at the wall, and you don't really see it because it's being drowned out by the key light. But what it is doing is it's stopping the back wall falling into shadow. So that was quite interesting. We did that. But what I also did then was I did pretty much the same photo, but I turned off the key light, so we only had the backlight. And there you end up with what is more or less the same photo. Couple of slight differences, but but the change of the light massively influences the mood and the feel of the photo. So I really want you to think about that if you're going to be photographing hands, about that notion of where the light is going from. And if you can get side light, if you can get backlight, if you can get edge light, all these kind of things, as well as the composition, you're wanting to think about diagonals. Okay, so key things then to think about when photographing hands. First of all, you want the hands, they're the dominant part of the photo. I don't want photos of people sort of full person at a distance and they just happen to be doing something with their hands. I want the hands kind of filling as much of the screen as you can. Think about the composition. Think about that notion of angles and diagonals, and even how the fingers, the change of the angle of the fingers. What is something pointing to something else? Is there an elbow coming up? Is the hand turning? Is it cupping? Is it enclosing? Is it pointing towards? Is it gripping? These are all the kind of things you think about. And think about the notion of angles and diagonals. But then also think about the light, because that light is so important, because where the light comes from is going to make a huge difference as to the texture and the shape, how the light falls across. Is the skin rough? Is it old hands or young hands that you're doing? Are you wanting to use a soft light? Are you wanting to use a hard light? Are you wanting the shadows? So light and composition are going to be extraordinarily important in trying to get a good narrative with the story, because ultimately the photo is a story. What story can you tell with about hands doing something, hands at work in some kind? And work can be loosely interpreted, but I want them to be in action, in doing something. So that then is that's what I want you to do. So the challenge then for next week, that will be Tuesday, suddenly forgotten the date today. Of course, it's the 10th today, so Tuesday the 17th of August will be Hands at Work. So I hope that kind of feels a little bit inspiring, gives you a few ideas. Let's check out a few comments here. Jackie says she loves the powder image. Maggie says she loves the intensity and tension in the hands. Oh, Becca's joined us and said good evening. Oh, Jim says lovely images. Vandana says such beautiful art comes out of busy hands. Becca says intriguing captures makes me want to see more. Well, you can always rewind to the beginning of the the podcast when we get to the end, Becca. Vandana says, wonder if you can take a picture of your own hands photographing. Well, in that case, if you were wanting to do something like that, you would essentially need two cameras. So you would need, if you're wanting to have hands holding the camera, whether you're doing from above or you're doing from the side or you're doing from some kind of funny angle, you want the hands and the camera in the shot. In order to do that, you then need a second camera. Now, it might be then that you use your, well, the phone's over there, it doesn't matter, whether you use your phone or another camera, but you set it on timer. You stick it on a tripod or rested it on some books or something like that. Line up, get the shot you want in the second camera, line it all up, and then set the timer for 2 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever you want, so that you can get back to take. So essentially a self-portrait with your own hands holding a camera would require two cameras to be able to do it. Or a mirror. The other option. But the thing is I don't just want like a quick selfie in the bathroom mirror of you doing that. That's not a hands photo. That's selfie in a mirror. It's not about your head, it's not about your face, it's about the hands. But you could, if you've got the mirror at the right angle, presumably you could, I'd have to play with it, but obviously, you play around with getting the reflection in the mirror and then taking a photo of the reflection. So, yeah, okay, Vandana, that's certainly worth playing around with if you want to have a go at photographing your own hands while you're at it. So, that could be fun. What else have we got? Sandra says, the reduction of light creates a much more dramatic photo. Absolutely it can. So again, this is part of the thing of the notion of lighting. How you're going to light it is going to change not just the texture, but as you say, the drama, the mood, the feel. Lighting is so important for mood and feel. We've talked about it many times before, and we will talk about it many times again, no doubt. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to say. I will give you a little reminder again at the end of the podcast that we'll be setting the challenge for next week. I do hope as many of you will take part as possible, and do try and be creative. Think about whether you are photographing your own hands, whether you are photographing the hands of somebody in the house that you share with, or whether you want to go out and about, or if you know somebody who works in a particular environment who's happy to let you come in and take photos of their hands. I think hands are they are incredible things, and they are full of story. A hand, as soon as you see a hand, you wonder who's attached to it. You wonder what those hands are doing. You wonder where those hands have been. You wonder the life of those hands. You kind of almost can't help it. So hands are wonderful narrative things. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what stories you're going to come up with, but you can also really challenge yourself with your technicals as well, or with your imagination, or when you're problem solving, whether you're using mirrors and timers, how you're adjusting the light and how you're playing with composition. But I really want to see what you're going to come up with, so that can be a lot of fun. Okay, so quick reminder, we're here live on Facebook or you might be watching it on YouTube. youtube.com/Kim Ayres. You can find all the previous 70 and a half episodes. And a quick reminder as well that if you are finding these podcasts useful, entertaining, interesting, you feel that they are really helping you with your photography, and you would like to contribute, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place to do it. So that notion of YouTube then. I do want to kind of, looking for a little bit of feedback here. Some of you, I think it was a dozen or so of you, rather wonderfully turned up on Sunday afternoon a couple of days ago to help me trial doing a live stream into YouTube. And apart from a short moment for a minute or two where I sort of froze, which I think actually I'm pretty certain wasn't down to the stream or wasn't down to YouTube. I think it was my computer suddenly doing one of those update things where behind the scenes of the computer it suddenly decides it's going to take a whole chunk of energy and memory to use up something, and suddenly everything else freezes up. So I think it was my problem rather than YouTube. As such, I think the quality was fine with the YouTube one. Everybody left comments, which was really good. Now, one of the things I noticed with this was the comments that people left didn't appear until the video had processed. When I finished doing the YouTube video and I ended the live stream, all the comments vanished until it was finished processing. And the processing can take anything up to 24 hours, they say. It was still processing when I went to bed that evening. The following morning, though, it had processed, and so all the comments seemed to be available. So that seems like an advantage, that if I record directly onto YouTube, it means that the comments people leave, you can actually watch back in real time. However, one of the things is, though, that I didn't edit it before I put it up because it was being recorded straight on. There is an option to edit, very basic editing, but I was able to trim the beginning, trim the end, and take out that little section in the middle where everything froze for 2 or 3 minutes. I then had to wait for another few hours for that to process, only to discover that when I did that, the comments have vanished. And when I went in search of answers, it turns out that if I edit on YouTube, you can't have the comment replay. So there's a little question here, and for those of you who want to answer, who were there on experiencing it on Sunday, or have actually gone back and watched it since, is what we're talking about is if I was to go down a YouTube route, you would have the choice of whether I tidy up and edit the podcasts, or you get to see the live comment, the comments as kind of in real time as such as people put them there. I suppose there's an advantage, the advantage of or the disadvantage of both. One is if you get the comments, then you don't get the slightly edited version. But I guess if you're turning up to watch it and you see it saying countdown 2 minutes, you probably just flick forward anyway. And if you get to the end and you realise that we've got the end screen up and there's still 3 or 4 minutes to go, you'll probably stop anyway. So if you're watching the recording, chances are you're probably fast forwarding through bits anyway. But I'm not sure. If you have any opinions, please drop them into the comments. Let me know as to whether you feel that you would rather see a tidied up video but not have the comments, or whether you'd rather be able to see the comments and not to worry too much about whether it's finely tuned in the editing. Jim has come in and said the YouTube was clear, comments were live, the only thing was your video was smaller, i.e. the little mannequin was not visible. Well, I think there's a thing there really where you can, in fact, if you want, there's options on the screen to be able to fill your screen. Maybe check when you're looking at YouTube videos, Jim, I think there are an option to kind of have it full size, full screen options on that. So that could possibly get around that, but I appreciate you taking the time on that one. What else did I want to say? Yeah, I suppose the other thing with this is I am. Oh, hang on. Sandra said, I watched Sunday on catch up and I thought you were clearer on the screen. Okay. Yeah, I felt that the quality on YouTube was superior to the Facebook video. Roy says, my vote is for keeping the comments. I really enjoy reading these. And Jackie says, I think I would like to see the comments instead of the finely tuned edit. Or she would like to see the comments instead. So, okay, so the comments. Okay, so if Roy really enjoys reading the comments and Jackie likes that as well. So it seems like there's a move towards you'd rather have the comments and maybe a slightly rougher video and just fast forward through the bits which I would normally edit out. Okay, that's good to know. The other thing is really, I suppose, is this bit whereby instead of when I set up the event page normally, like tonight, if you're on Facebook, it says you should, if you've said you're joining it, you get a little notification saying, oh, Kim is going live. You click over, you can see me live. I don't know what it was like. Did you get the event page when I had it set to go to YouTube, and you go to the event page and you had to click on the link to go to YouTube in order to watch it? Was that confusing? Was that incredibly straightforward? There is part of me that is really kind of tempted to go towards YouTube. There's a lot of people I keep inviting along to the podcast who turn around and say, whoa, don't do Facebook, can't stand Facebook or whatever. But YouTube feels more accessible to everyone. So, but I'm going to stick with Facebook at least for the next few weeks. But it's possible what I might do is jump ship to YouTube. But even if you don't want to comment now, if you want to have a think about it and leave me some comments or either message me directly, which is absolutely, I'd enjoy that, or leave comments in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. If I go to YouTube, I will still keep the Facebook group. We can still put pictures in there. We can still comment. It just means that the actual live stream that I would do would be on YouTube instead of here on Facebook. So I'm keen to get feedback on that. Obviously, I don't want to jump ship to YouTube if everybody then throws up their hands in horror and actually lose you wonderful people. What I'm hoping is that all you wonderful people will be more than happy to come to YouTube, and we'll pick up a few more people on the way. So have a little think about that, and if you could get back to me, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Right. Okay. I think that's what I wanted to say about YouTube. So let's move on then. Oh, Vandana says, my vote for comments as well. Cool. Okay. So what we're going to do now then is, hang on a sec, it looks like somebody else has gone and commented on, oh, Pat says it's Tuesday today, so here I am again, Pat from Somerset. So, okay, so Pat's joined us now. That's great. I've had a couple of people commenting on the photo in the event page. I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know whether you, again, Facebook is, I think that's another bit where I'm kind of getting a bit fed up with Facebook, is people seem to be, it sort of, I mean, it keeps alerting me on a Monday saying, you're just about to go live, and I get into a real panic, and then remember it's Tuesday and Facebook is messing me about again. Right, okay, so let's move on to the critique section then, and let's go to, where are we? So the critique section then, this is your chance for getting feedback on images. Now next week, because we're doing the challenge, it's not so much in the way of critique, although critique will be possible if you're wanting to stick your images in and you want a bit of feedback. Let me know you're looking for feedback when you put them in. But this week we've got about half a dozen people that have put in for it with our images. So we'll start with I was going to say we'll start with VG. Is VG in yet? I've not seen a comment from VG. I know VG, of course, it's well past midnight for VG in India And I'm also aware that she's incredibly busy at the moment, so she may well be sleeping through. I thought I'd do VG first just because, so that she could, so she could go to bed later. But I've not actually seen her say hi yet, so she might not actually be in to watch this live. Tell you what I'll do. Let's start with Inga. Because I definitely saw Inga from Oslo is in, so we'll make a start with Inga's photo. So Inga sent a couple, but we'll deal with one in particular, where basically she said she was out at the seaside for about half an hour before sunset, 9:20 p.m. It was a beautiful golden light. Now, where are we going? We'll do that one. So she then took this, a bunch of photos, and she said there was this guy who was doing some kind of windsurfing, and I was intrigued by the turquoise wings and the silhouette of the guy against the sky. But maybe I should choose between the sunset or the windsurfer, or the windsurfer brighter and sharper. She'd done a couple of edits, but she sent me this original. I was looking for some advice regarding lighting, and basically, so the problem that Inga's up against here, and it's something that we often find, is you've got a low light. There's some lovely colours in the sky, but the foreground is now, because we're just kind of past the point where the sun's set, the colours in the foreground, if the camera has adjusted for the sky, the foreground becomes dark, kind of too dark, really. But if we brighten up so we can see more detail in the foreground, we then lose the beautiful colours in the sky as well. So it is a tricky one, and I think there is a point whereby if you're trying, unfortunately what you can't do in the same way is you can't, last week we talked about that notion of HDR, where you can maybe take 2 or 3 photos of the same scene but at different exposures and then blend them together in Photoshop, and that's fine as long as your picture isn't moving. If you've got an absolutely static landscape, you take one which is slightly overexposed so that you get more detail in the ground level. You take one that's underexposed so you get more detail in the sky, and then one in the middle to kind of balance it out, and then you can stick them together in your editing software. But in something like this, where you've got a windsurfer who's moving, you can't do that, because if you take 3 photos, in each of those 3 photos, the windsurfer is going to be in a different place. And so that's going to seriously mess up your editing software in being able to blend them together. So there does come a point here whereby, in a way, you have to kind of make your choice. And you say, am I going for a beautiful sky, and then I'm going to expose for the sky and then just angle myself as low as I can so that the windsurfer is really silhouetted against that sky? Or am I going to concentrate on the windsurfer, not worry too much about the sky? And part of your problem here is, let's just open this in Photoshop a moment. So part of your problem here then is that the windsurfer is essentially just below the horizon. If you'd managed to be at a lower level, if you'd sort of been, I don't know, almost at sea level as such, and maybe if there hadn't been background behind him, then you could have actually had him silhouetted against the sky, which would have been much more dramatic. The problem here is that he's, half of him sort of lost against the background there as well. So we do have this problem of which way do you go. So, I mean, if we just straightforwardly take a levels, and we can see here that this is quite underexposed. And if we drag this up, we can see a little bit more of this, but we're starting to lose the sky. And the more we try and come in to bring out detail on here, the less of that lovely colour in the sky we have. So it is a bit of a problem. And like I say, really, ultimately, it comes down to making a choice at the point you're taking the photo. In terms of rescuing, there's a couple of things we can attempt here. I'll take out the levels for the moment and actually just show you that idea of curves. Now, what I can do with the curves, we can brighten this up a bit, and maybe not quite to there, and I can brighten this so that we get much more a sense of the foreground and the sky. But we've then kind of lost a bit of the sky. But if I do another curves here, and I drag it down, you can kind of drag it down until we get that beautiful colour in the sky again, except for the fact that we've now lost the foreground. But here what we do is we just mask it. And so I can, what I've done here is, well, if I make a very big brush, then essentially, and it's feathered, then you can see it sort of feathers the background a bit, and I can lighten the foreground, but without having a hard line running across. So something like that, if I wanted, I could even, that makes it very dark. I could even darken the top a bit there as well, but although that's starting to look a bit grey, maybe not quite so happy with that. So there's sort of level, and then you can kind of play, maybe just, if I reduce that a little bit. So you can kind of essentially split the screen, but you do a kind of a fuzzy, so you don't have a hard line where, if I change that to a pencil, for example, which will give me a hard line on it, then so do something like that, you're going to see, it's not going to work. So you have to have a soft edge. So you make sure that you've got a brush and it's a fuzzy edge with what you're, where you're brightening it or not. So that's kind of what I would suggest there. It's also kind of deciding how much of the sky you want. Do you want less of the surfer and more of the sky, or do you want more of the surfer, less of the sky? Finding the balance really is, and then that's a personal choice, and it's kind of coming down to that thing that I said at the beginning, which is, in a way, when you're there, you're making a choice. Do I want the surfer to be in detail, or do I want the sky to have the colours and actually have the surfer as a silhouette? And if I'm having the surfer as a silhouette, I really need to make sure that that silhouette is against the sky and not against the background, because the background itself has become silhouetted. If you remember last week when I was talking about the geese, the steel geese sculptures that I photographed, I really needed to have the sky in the background so that we got the outlines, because if they weren't against the sky, the background just got so busy that you couldn't really make them out. So I hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas there, Inga, to play with. Right, okay. And right, so what we'll do now then is move on to Benedetto, I think. And so Benedetto, well, let's see. He sent in the edited and the original. So this is the edited version, and this is his original photo. So what he says is, I was out in the forest and with great skies and a nice bend in the road. Okay, let's talk about this. Is the original. I already had the black and white in mind to bring out the moody sky. So it's included the original and the black and white conversion. I cropped to have the row of posts also lead in the image and form a line on the 1/3 mark. So if we go here, so he's got these posts in the road like that. So the road and the posts corral the viewer's eye to the centre of the drama in the skyline. And I think you're kind of right there, Benedetto, that if we take a look at the original, there's a whole bunch over here on the right which isn't really doing much for us. There's a nice diagonal line coming in from the left, but it gets to the centre and then swings off back round to the left. And so essentially that line draws us here. All this bit on the right is fairly pointless. So you've cropped out the right and you've made it this square format. What I would say with this, I think, your conversion to black and white is fine. My only kind of real feeling with this is that it kind of feels, whilst you've gone for the square crop, I don't know that there's enough in the sky, that there's actually enough drama in the sky to really warrant having that amount of sky in it. There are sometimes you get clouds which are incredibly detailed all the way through. I mean, if we flip back here, really the real drama of the sky is this bit on the horizon. This is where, you know, the bit just above the trees, that's where it's most dramatic, because you've got the contrast. You've got these lovely kind of diagonals coming downwards, the wind's blowing the rain in across it, and you've got the light behind it, and you've got the contrast with the horizon of the trees. As we come up, yes, there's a bit of texture here, but it's not like, but whereas with some skies you get incredible details, this is kind of more loosely painted. And because there's so much detail in the foreground, even in your black and white one, I think what happens is the brain kind of goes, oh yeah, there's a sky, and then you drop down here. All your real story is happening pretty much below the horizon. You know, this is the really strong line of the road, that's what's grabbing your attention. As such, with this, I'm really tempted. I would say that instead of trying to go square with this, I reckon you could go landscape. And I think you really could lose most of that sky. You come down and essentially just, if you're doing your rule of thirds, have the horizon on that third there. And I think when you do something like that, I think that becomes kind of just as dramatic. I don't think you've lost anything, and you've possibly gained a little bit more. You kind of draw it, now it's much more about the road and that notion of an empty road on a dark and stormy, with a dark and stormy sky. We still got that sense of the dark and stormy sky, but it's more now about the narrative of the road rather than about the sky, because I don't think, you know, if we look at the original, whether, yeah, it's kind of okay, but there's not quite enough in it really to hold our attention, whereas I think this bottom part is much more about what's holding our attention. So my suggestion really with that, Benedetto, is that idea, think about that idea of the landscape. You know, I mean, if we, if we go back to your original unedited, you know, where you've got it in landscape, again, it's that notion, you know, you're just pulling it down. But as you, all I'm going to do there is pull that in on the right, something like that, which is what you've already done. Maybe fractionally straighten that, and you've got that ready to convert to black and white. But that's kind of what you've done there. So that's kind of my thought on that. Is, yeah, think about where the story is, and the real story, I think, is the empty road, and the stormy sky isn't the real part of the story. I think it's a supporting role. I think it's a really good supporting role, because this would look completely different if it did have a clear blue sky as opposed to those looming clouds. But it's a supporting role for the story of the empty road rather than the other way round. I don't think the road is supporting the sky. I think the sky is supporting the road. And as such, to have 2/3 of it about the sky, I think kind of is the wrong way round for the narrative. You may well disagree. That's fine. That's okay to do that. But if but that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I hope you find that useful. A little useful insight, another way of looking at things. Okay, great. Well, a couple of Ingas come in saying, great, thanks. Useful reminder of the disturbing background behind the silhouette. Tried to brighten and enhance the wings of the surfer, but will try to brighten the foreground and the lower part. Cool. Okay, Roy's saying the black and white looks much better. And then Jackie thinks the landscape crop looks good, and Inga also feels that cropping the landscape is very effective to draw you in. And Becca is saying this will be cool in a panoramic shot. Yeah, in that sense you could make it even wider depending on, but at that point you would still need the, actually I'll tell you what, let's just flick back to that for a sec. In that case, let's just do content aware. And if you were making it more panoramic, you'd kind of take it way over, something like that. Of course, this will actually mess it up completely. But yeah, okay, that kind of works too. You actually have the that way the road kind of comes 2/3 of the way across. You know, kind of really sweeping in, drawing you right in before it swings round. So yeah, something like that might work too. So yeah, nice call, Becca. Okay, right. Excuse me. So, excellent. Let's move on then. Okay, no sign of VG. I guess she's probably just sleeping through it, and I don't blame her, to be honest. So what I'll move on to VG's now, and before we move on to the next bit, and she can catch up when she gets the chance. So VG sent in these right at the last moment, and what she did was she sent in a couple of photos of the same thing. One where she's gone for a portrait, and one where she's gone for a landscape. And her comment was, these photos were just taken a couple of hours back, so actually shot this evening, shot through my mobile. I would like to know if the landscape or the portrait do justice to this shot. It was taken at the golden hour, quite literally. Wishing I had my DSLR with me. Asking for the best crop here with the water and sky. Should we make it in equal halves? So what she's done here is first of all, what a brilliant, so to get the water that smooth, that you've got that kind of clarity of reflection, is something really quite special. So you've got that, done that in a kind of a landscape format, and then you've got the same kind of picture in portrait format. With both of these, what you've done is you've pretty much gone using rule of thirds, whether in this case the horizon is more or less on the lower third, and this one the horizon is more or less on the upper third. But part of what you're also asking is, would it have worked had you actually put the horizon in the middle? And I suppose it's an interesting one. And really what we're kind of getting to here is personal aesthetic choice, is what you consider to be the most interesting part. Because I'm sure if we could take a dozen people and end up with a dozen different answers, or at least 3 or 4 different answers. There are some who would feel that the sky is the more important part and the reflection is the supporting part of, so it's really about the sky, and then the reflection is a kind of a nice added extra. There are others who would feel that the reflection is the really powerful part. The sky is the bit that's giving you the reflection, but actually that's the kind of the secondary role. So depending on which one you think is the most important, just like we were kind of talking about Benedetto's picture just now, kind of depends on which you give emphasis to. If you put whatever you're giving 2/3 to over 1/3, you're essentially saying this is the bigger bit because I consider this to be more important, mostly. In this one, the reflection is then considered to be more important than above. With this one, it's more about the sky, and then the reflection is the add-on to it. And again, whether you decide to go landscape or portrait then becomes a personal choice. It might depend where it's going to be displayed. Are you going to be printing it up? Is it going to be going into an online competition? If it's going to be shown on mobile phones, actually the portrait works better. If it's going to be viewed on laptops and desktop screens, the landscape version would work better. Something like that would work really quite nice as a desktop wallpaper as well. So, there are brilliant colours, fantastic reflections, but mostly it comes down to your choice as to what you want to do with it. Now, okay, let's just take that other bit, which is the idea of maybe do we put it in the middle? So let's just open this with Photoshop a moment. Close some of these here. Let's just close Inga's and Benedetto's pictures, and just straighten that horizon a fraction. There we go. And what happens then if we do actually if I take that down and we make that square-ish, like that, that's about okay, that's square. So if you actually made it square and then place that horizon smack bang in the middle, and somehow, now quite often where I would say there's a way, the rule of thirds quite often tends to be the best option. With this, I have to say I really quite like that idea of a kind of a middle split, because you actually have your rule of thirds bit really comes in with the way the clouds are. This wonderful kind of peachy, orangey cloud on the right here is then beautifully reflected in the bottom part here. And so that's creating your primary off-center line. And then likewise, in the third over here, we've got this lovely swirl of cloud, which, I mean, it's almost kind of, I mean, if you rotated that image, it's almost angel wings. So let's image rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. The way these clouds come round like that, which I rather like. So there's definitely something to be said in that, and I think maybe with this, again, depending on what you've got, you could possibly vignette in the corners a little bit more, and then even possibly play with the clarity. Let's just sort of see what that looks like. If I go to the optics and start vignetting a little bit more, so it's drawing a bit more attention into the middle. Let's go to the basics here and then grab that clarity slider and pull that up. Now actually that's made the vignette too strong, so I might actually just, I think you've already got a bit of a vignette in there, so I'll maybe just take that back out. But I think that starts to look really quite interesting with a little bit more clarity. It's kind of adding, it's kind of really ramping up what's happening with the clouds over there. If we're losing a little bit of, you can even nudge the vibrance or the saturation. No, we've got to be careful about overcooking it, but a little slight nudge like that. So that's another possibility as well, just kind of emphasizing that. So there, although it is split, because it's darker in the reflection, it's not you've not got that problem of it feeling like it's absolutely it's not like you've took one half and just literally doubled it. You've got that sort of, well, I think we talked before, last year I did a section on kind of asymmetrical symmetry. So it's like symmetry, but it is something that's not quite symmetrical about it. So you're going for symmetry, but you have something else in there which throws out the symmetry. And in this case, on the left or the up and down, the fact that the bottom part is darker does that. We've also got it asymmetrical in the fact that the left and the right aren't quite balanced. So yeah, I would say in this case, this is one of those which I think would work where you've got an even split like that. And the square crop in this case, perfect for Instagram. So hope you find that one useful, VG. Right, let's close that. And okay, so Vandana says, brilliant shot, VG. I love the reflection as it got the beautiful sky there anyway. Sandra says, lovely photos. Sandra prefers the landscape version. Oh, Stacey says she's found the tool to remove the background on her product. Okay, fair enough. Maybe you don't need to stick one in for next week then. Rory said it would be interesting to flip this to see what this looks like, and Rebecca says beautiful capture. Okay, let's just see what you mean by flip it. So if I go to image rotation, or sort of flip vertical, then you end up with that. There's another way of looking at it. I feel, to me, actually, personally I prefer that way. But yeah, you're right. Always worth playing around. So. Okay, next then. So next we will go on to VG, Inga, Benedito, Vandana. Right, so Vandana. Now, she put in this last week, well, she put in 2 pictures, so I was looking at one of those on Sunday. But I said I would come back to this one. Won't spend too long on it, but there are a couple of things that I just wanted to say. So Vandana says, continuing on the landscape challenge, because because last week I said to, or the week before, can't remember now, I said to Vandana to move away from the idea of doing portrait, especially when she's working with a phone camera, and to try and do some stuff with landscape. So Vandana's been doing this, which is absolutely brilliant. Says, I thought I would look at some roads again and make the most of the golden hour. Hope this meets the technical side, which I'm trying to improve. I stood on the side of a hill embankment and took this roundabout. My focus was on the road curving into the unknown and the movement taking the eye towards it. Hope it works. Please critique. So first of all, I have to say, I think it's absolutely brilliant, Vandana, that you are now, using your phone sideways and trying to think about that notion of landscape. That's great. So technically, though, the thing that I am going to turn around here and say is we need to have it straight in the horizon. the problem is it feels tilted. Now, I know you're standing on an embankment, and if you line this up with your eyes, the chances are this is how it looked. But you can always still tilt it. And what you really need to do when you're lining up, when you're doing a shot, that you need to try and get the horizon straight. Well, having said that, there's two possibilities here. You either get the horizon straight, you focus on that, or you focus on any strong verticals and make sure that they are vertical and not tilted. Now, if you've got a big broad horizon, if you've got the sea where you've got the line far in the distance, then that line has to be horizontal, because our brain looks at it and we know the horizon is horizontal. And so if it's slightly off, we look at it and we go, that's tilted, that's not right. Now, in the case of this photo, we can't actually see the horizon because it's hidden behind the trees. But what we do know is that not just that the trees are likely to be straight up, but there are other giveaways here. Like there's a lamppost here, that would be straight up. The edge, and very importantly, like the edge of this building, that would be vertical. It wouldn't be tilting over sideways. And because our brain knows this, we look at this and we go, everything feels tilted. So it's important then that what we do is we just straighten it up. And if I open this with Photoshop, and it's just literally a case of not doing that, there we go, turning it, rotating it to something like that. Okay, and now we've got that. We can. Now the other thing I would say is with this setup, we've got a lot of tree on the right here, which isn't really adding to the story. We only need part of that to have the story. So maybe we could crop out a bit of that as well. So you see, we don't need as much tree. We've still got the same story there, which is this parked cars, empty road up to the roundabout. But what you can see here now, though, is primarily the bit that I really wanted to talk about was the notion that the verticals feel vertical. So the edge of this house is now upright. The lamppost is now upright. The posts on the roundabout are upright. And you can see, I mean, the roundabout itself is on a little bit of a slope. Now, if we, in your previous version, this is almost straight, but the thing is that's on a slope. So it's okay that being on a slope because we know it's on a slope because we know the verticals go straight. So our brain is just looking for how do we balance this. And because we can see the edge of the building, we can see the central part of the cones, we can see a lamp post, all these things are vertical. That's what's allowing us to know that that now is as it should be and it's not feeling tilted. So that's really the next thing that I wanted to say then, Vandana, in terms of the next steps of improving your technicality. First of all, brilliant. You're now using your phone in landscape mode. That's really good. Secondly, what I like about this as well is you're using all of your picture in landscape mode, or as much of it as you can. Because one of the things we talked about, like on Sunday, when you had the picture of the small girls, or the previous week where you had the picture of your daughter's eyes behind the glasses and the perspex, was that you were cropping in so much that you were losing a lot of detail. So the second part of the challenge, as well as doing it landscape, was to try and fill as much of the picture as you can. If you have to crop in, that's okay, but you don't really want to be losing more than about 10, maximum about 20% of your image when you crop in. You don't want to be cropping in so small that you've lost 80% of the image. So this is good. Most of the picture is in there. But the third thing for you to now take on board is to make sure that if you can see the horizon, make sure the horizon is straight, or probably more importantly, if you've got any kind of building or urban man-made kind of thing, look for the dominant verticals and make sure that the edge of the building or the lamp post or whatever it is straight up. And if you do that, the brain automatically interprets everything else as being, oh, well, that's all right then. Because otherwise what happens is when you look at this, you just kind of go, it's tilted. And you're no longer looking at the content of the picture. Instead, you're thinking about the fact that it's tilted, which isn't the story. This isn't a story of tilted photography. This is a story of the road, the roundabout, the drawing your eye in. Okay, so I hope that helps, Vandana. I hope that gives you a few ideas to think about. Okay, but thank you for sending that one in. Right. Okay. Oh, and Pat says, I like the delicate colouring in this urban photo. Oh, and Vandana says, thank you so much. That makes sense. Good. Really pleased about that. Right. Okay. Now, Jim sent in another picture. Now, for those who were watching on Sunday, Jim sent in a lovely picture of a rusting old cross on part of a piece of fence with barbed wire with the old convent school in Dumfries in the background. He then went round from a little angle, another angle, and came up with basically keeping in mind some of the stuff I was talking about, where rule of thirds and watching out about the background. He then did this one where there's kind of trees and stuff in the background, and he's got the cross in a kind of rule of thirds, and we've got this lovely tangle of barbed wire. And I have to say, absolutely definite improvement. Now, he didn't actually stick it in for critique to begin with, but I said there was one or two things about it I wouldn't mind commenting on. So he said, yeah, fine, go ahead with it. And he did send me through the original, this one, which, he's taken that and then cropped it. But I think what I will just do is work with this for the moment, because the only things I really wanted to say about this, I think, first of all, I think it's a huge improvement on the last one. I think you're definitely getting the idea there. Is two things really. Is you took your original one in the middle, and that's meant when you've cropped off, you've cropped afterwards. There's a little bit I think you could have done well if you'd had it to the side and got more. You see, I love the tangle of this barbed wire, and you could have either gone to the left or you could have gone to the right and got more of that tangle and had the cross. So, and I think just a little bit more landscape. Just something, maybe let's do content aware, and yeah, something like that. I just think gives it a slightly better balance. I just, that little bit wider. Maybe it's my aesthetic. Maybe I've just got the more, So, that's not even full cinematic, but, I do tend to prefer a slightly, I like square to be square, and then I like landscape to really feel like it's landscape. I'm never quite so keen on a kind of, say, 5:4 ratio. Never really kind of quite does it for me. It needs to be a kind of 2:3 or wider in an ideal world. Now, the other thing about this is there is a sort of sense of, I think you've lost some of the detail in your conversion to black and white. Although you sent me the original, I think your conversion to black and white basically works. It's a good version, except for the fact that we've lost some of the detail in the barbed wire, which I don't think you necessarily needed to have done. If I just quickly drag this into Camera Raw, I think now, if I take the highlights and I take that down, that kind of darkens too much. But if I take the whites, I can darken down the whites. We still keep most of the stuff there, but now what happens is we get a little bit more detail back into the barbed wire. I don't know if you can see that. You see, taken out there. So notice just into the shadows here. So maybe with it, but if in your original one, if you were playing with it, you'd have a little bit more with that. And then I think what you could do is play around a little bit more with maybe the texture, or actually less the texture. I think more the clarity. You see, I quite like the clarity, and that then sort of brings out a little bit more detail in this cross. And then at this point, maybe a little bit of vignette, or maybe that's just because of the amount that I pulled this out here. But I really like the texture in this cross, and I wonder whether even just a little bit of kind of dodge and burn might make a little bit of difference here. So if I'm lightening up the midtones here, if I just kind of run this over, something like this, make this cross, make the light parts lighter, and it kind of stands out against that black background a little bit more. But then also come in with the burn tool and on the shadows, and just so that's really creating more texture into that cross. Zoom in a little bit here. You'll see what I mean. And I think that way the lichens and the rust and what have you come out a little bit stronger. Offset, so the changes we've made have gone from that to that, and I think that's kind of brings more attention to that cross, and then it kind of sits a bit better with the wonderful barbed wire as well. But that's all I really want to say. It's just a couple of minor edits. I think you're definitely you were on the right track already there with that, Jim. So anyway, hope you find that a little bit useful. So just close that, and where are we? Okay. Excuse me. So finally then, last one I'm going to come on to is Graham. And Graham sent me in a couple of photos. Well, I'm just going to show one at the moment. And he sent this in for critique. Well, I have to say I really like it as it is. Quite amazing. So Graham says he's playing around with... Graham comes from the days of analog cameras. That was his kind of main thing, but he has moved into the digital age, still playing around a lot with it. But whenever Graham does people, I'm always seriously impressed, and I like this a lot. But I asked him then, well, okay, I mean I'm quite happy with this photo kind of thing, but so I asked what it is he was after, and he said really he was sort of wondering whether there's better angles or lighting, and it's an odd one, this, because the only thing I could think, my first thought with this was the notion of the verticals, just like I was talking with Vandana about. And under normal circumstances, you see the door in the back is tilted. You see that you can see from the way the corner of the room is, and the way these posters and stuff are on, that essentially the room is tilted. But you've got this powerful vertical in the wheel that he's holding in front of him. And I thought, well, what happens if I actually take this and straighten up that vertical, and then allow this to be slightly off? And you know what? I don't think it actually works quite as well. I think it works better when the vertical is held with the wheel rather than with, because that gives him that little bit more tilt and angle, which I really like the angle in this. The way Graham's got the head sort of, this line that curves around and takes you up to the top left corner, really adds this energy. Although he is just sitting there quite still, which is a fantastic expression on his face, like, what on earth do you think you're looking at? It adds there's such a level of energy, almost like ready to pounce, ready to explode, ready to happen. There's a tension in this photo, and actually that slightly tilted background, I think, helps to add to that tension when you've got the wheel which is kind of planted really firmly as you kind of your anchor point, really. If that was all tilted a bit too further, it wouldn't work. But because that wheel sits in the middle as a really strong vertical, it anchors the rest of the photo. Lighting's a tricky one. I think, generally speaking, the way I'm often thinking with lighting is essentially a two light system, where you think, well, okay, I mean, if I'm going for a painterly effect, then you just want a one light source, and a soft daylight source will be quite good. It looks like you've got something like that coming from the front. I don't know whether you're looking into a garage or through a door or something like that. The other way of doing it is, if you're wanting the background, is how do I get a backlight into it? Now, you don't have a backlight, but you are using the overhead light, which comes down, which is kind of acting on his face. So we do have essentially a two light source. We can see that the front of his face is lit by, whether it's the door or the window, just over your left shoulder. But he's got and then there's almost a little line of shadow running between it before we hit the other light, which is the yellowish light, which I presume is coming down from the overhead. So in a way, because his head is tilted, we've managed to get that two light source. So much beyond that, I don't really know what else to suggest, Graham. I have to say, I think it's a great photo. I'm really impressed with it. If I'd done that photo, I'd be feeling really chuffed with it. Your editing, I presume there's probably quite a high ISO in it. There's a This is only a low resolution photo, so I don't know what the original was like. But there's a sort of slightly grungy element to the way that you've edited it, which fits into it. You know, there's lots of little dust and stuff on his shoes, on his boots, there's all this stuff lying around. He's obviously, you know, his work trousers and his work top, and your processing seems to have worked with it. So yeah, tricky one. Not really sure what else to suggest with this one, Graham, but I'm kind of impressed with it. But if you wanted to send me the original, or you wanted to talk about, if you've got things you specifically want to know about process, you see, I can't really give you other ideas of how I would process this, because I don't know what your original was to begin with. If you send me the unedited version, then I can say, I didn't realise that you have more detail here, you could draw that out, or maybe the quality was like this, so here's a couple of other suggestions. So if you're going to send me stuff in the future, Graham, it's really useful if you can send me the unedited version as well. But other than that, like this photo, I'd be quite happy with. So that's pretty much that. Right, okay, and yeah, Sandra says, great environmental portrait. I wouldn't change anything. Pat loves the moody expressions. Stacey thinks it's a great portrait. Oh, Jim says thanks for the tips. Cool. Glad that's working. So that pretty much brings us towards the end of this. So now the things that I would like from you, the things to before you go running off. Next week, then we are talking about we're going to be doing the hands at work challenge, or the hands doing something challenge. I'll get an event page up tomorrow, and really I want you to think about the lighting and the angles and the doing and the story. What I'm going to also do is I'm going to write a blog post tomorrow morning where I will also talk about some of these things. So if you go to kimayres.blogspot.com or .co.uk, yeah, kimayres.blogspot.com will be fine, and I'll be putting that in at the same time as I'm embedding this video and uploading it to YouTube. So start having a think about what you want to do with the hands, and I'm really looking forward to what you're going to come up with for next week's challenge for that. If you found this interesting, if you found it useful, if you feel it's helping your photography at all, you would like to support these podcasts, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is always appreciated. And finally, yes, I'm seriously thinking about doing the shift to YouTube at some point in the next few weeks, maybe, unless there's compelling reason not to. So I would appreciate any kind of feedback for those that either were there on Sunday who watched it, or those who've gone to YouTube and watched it on catch up. Any kind of feedback you can give me to help me make some decisions on whether I should or shouldn't be doing that would also be greatly appreciated. Cool. Okay, last couple of comments here. Jackie says thank you, Kim, and thanks again. Vandana says thank you. Stacey says thank you for the podcast, always a pleasure, and the editing processes always help. Excellent. I'm glad you think so. Cool. Okay. Well, that's it. I will start. Leave your comments in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Start submitting your photos, all this kind of stuff. Oh, Graham's come in and said thanks, Kim. Excellent. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday. Right. Take care. Look after yourselves. Cheerio.